This is spine-chilling suggestions for spooky season, horror readers advisory for libraries, and I have a fantastic co-host with me today who will introduce herself.
Hey everyone, my name is Scotty Capel. I'm the Scholarly Communications Librarian at Western Carolina University in Columbia, North Carolina, and I've worked here for about 9 years. I've been a horror reader since I was a child. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was my gateway, and I've definitely been hooked ever since. And I was lucky that both of my parents were huge readers themselves. My dad especially loved horror, so I frequently rated their past reads and was introduced to authors like Robert McCammon and Stephen King, probably at a fairly inappropriately young age. My reading preferences within horror are pretty broad, but my go-to is apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic fiction. And professionally, I've been able to channel my love of horror by serving as a selector for Hunter Library's leisure collection, which is broken into several sub-collections. I'm the selector for general fiction, and because we don't have a horror-specific sub-collection, I include horror in my collecting. I've been purchasing for this area since 2018 and have had the pleasure of presenting and publishing about circulation patterns of our horror titles.
Right. And you may know me. I am the instruction librarian for NC Live. My name's Devin Waugh. I just wrapped up reading Universal Harvester by John Darnielle, who's the band leader of the Mountain Goats. This title was great. It was cosmic horror, which is a huge part of horror that I love. I love The King in Yellow. I love Lovecraft. But I think my gateway with horror was Goosebumps as a kid, Say Cheese and Die. So as an adult, my love of horror has spanned to movies, especially, but I read a lot of horror as well and paranormal science fiction and mysteries, which is really kind of a blend of horror, as you'll see in this webinar. Um, and my main doorways are setting and language. I love horror with a strong sense of place. So just getting into the agenda, we'll go through a background on the genre, key titles, entry points, um, and some great series to kind of get into from the last couple of years. I'll go into Novelist and some resources that Novelist has created for getting up to speed with the horror genre, particularly for middle grades and YA. Because as some of you may have noticed, there's been an explosion of authors for middle grades and YA horror. I'm piloting, you'll see in this webinar, the spooky to scary spectrum. So trying to find some of those lighter reads that are more on the Scooby-Doo side, and then the scary stuff for those who are really seeking that out. We'll go into marketing horror, some examples from other libraries in North Carolina, and we'll wrap up with Q&A. So starting off with background in key titles.
Asking you all some of the trends that you like, some of the authors that you like. So if you could share in the chat some horror titles and authors that you yourselves like. Joe Hill, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer McMahon, great. Junji Ito, love, love, love. Grady Hendrix, for sure. Sylvia Maria Garcia, fantastic.
Yeah.
Classic authors here.
Mm-hmm.
Works as well. Wonderful. Thank y'all for sharing. Devin, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide. What
Yeah.
horror titles and authors do your patrons like? Oh yes, I just recently read Monstrelio. It was beautiful. Stephen King, Joe Hill, for sure.
Stephen King having resurgence here. Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much for sharing, everyone. And as Devin and I were kind of planning this webinar, we do want to honor the huge role that Stephen King and Joe Hill and Dean Koontz and other, kind of classic horror names have had. And we love them, read all of their works, but we also want to highlight here some of those authors that maybe you and your patrons are less familiar with. So we won't be talking as much about Stephen King, Joe Hill, Dean Koontz, those kind of big name authors, but we do, cherish their role in horror for sure. But we're going to start with some gateway titles. The titles featured here represent a variety of horror subgenres. They tend to be a little bit lighter on the gore, or gore is tempered by humor to allow new horror readers to determine their level of comfort with some of the more gruesome aspects that you can encounter in horror. And I'll just give a little brief synopsis of each of the titles we have here, starting with Cackle by Rachel Harrison. Cackle is a cozy horror that follows Annie, who is a young woman who moves to a small town for a new teaching job after a pretty traumatic breakup. There she befriends Sophie, who is this enigmatic but really engaging person who seems to be largely shunned by the town. And at first, Annie's really grateful for this friendship, but she comes a little bit wary of Sophie after she starts experiencing strange occurrences, and ultimately determines and discovers that Sophie is a witch. Nevertheless, Annie becomes more enchanted by Sophie and the changes that she herself experiences as they spend more time together. Next, we have Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, which one of y'all noted in the chat as one of your preferred authors. She's fantastic. Mexican Gothic, as the title suggests, is Gothic fiction. This is set in 1950s Mexico, and it follows a young socialite, Noemi, who travels from Mexico City to check on her recently married cousin, Catalina, who's living in this remote mountain estate after receiving a very concerning letter from Catalina. There, as you might expect with Gothic fiction, the dread builds as Noemi is haunted by terrible nightmares and slowly learns what the house and her cousin's husband and family are hiding. And without revealing too much, this is a Gothic tale that's also a great entry point to Sporer, which is fungal horror. Horror Store by Grady Hendrix is a comedic horror. This is a little bit of an older title for Grady Hendrix. It's set in a Scandinavian big box furniture store evocative of IKEA that was built on the site of a former prison and is haunted by the warden and inmates. Not only is the story really engaging here, but so too is the book's format. So as you can kind of see from the cover, Horror Store is laid out like an IKEA catalog and includes simple illustrations, the kind that you often see in IKEA assembly instructions, that get progressively more disturbing as the storyline gets more disturbing. This is a genuinely scary book, but I do find that the more frightening elements are tempered by the humor, the format, and the setting. And then finally, we have Hollowed Kingdom by Kira Jane Buxton. This is another comedic horror. It's narrated by a sarcastic, foul-mouthed crow named ST, who navigates post-zombie apocalypse Seattle with a brave but dim-witted hound. And as they navigate this new landscape, they determine that they need to free the other domesticated animals that have been locked in their homes as their human owners have transitioned into zombies. They also have to learn how to interact with the wild animals they encounter. This one also has some more frightening elements, but the perspective from the crow provides a little bit of distance from the more gruesome aspects of the zombie apocalypse. And Devin, if you don't mind switching to the next slide. So for key trends in horror, with this current horror renaissance that we're seeing, it was hard to narrow down the trends. So I'm going to highlight a few that are kind of more thematic in nature, and then a few that are more related to subgenre or features of the plot. So looking at the more thematic trends, the first is feminist horror. These books explore topics like identity, the female body, subversion of traditional gender roles and power dynamics. As an example, I have Mother Thing by Ainsley Hogarth, which is a darkly funny domestic horror novel about a woman who must save her husband and herself from the vengeful ghost of her mother-in-law, while also coming to terms with her troubled past with her own mother and her desire to become a mother herself. Everyday Evil explores the idea that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary cruelty by becoming complicit actors in systems that perpetuate and normalize evil. As an example, we have The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. This is set in Jim Crow, Florida, and follows Robbie Stevens Jr., a Black child who, through a really unfair trial, is sent to a segregated reform school after a minor altercation with a white teenager who threatened his sister. The reform school has a history of cruelty that's rooted in racism, which Robbie learns from both the living and dead reform school residents. This book was inspired by the real-life Dozier School for Boys, where Due's great-uncle died, and the character of Robbie is named after her great-uncle. Due has also said that other members of her family served as inspiration for key characters. It's a really haunting and beautiful and very troubling story. And then for the final thematic trend, we have trauma, and these stories involve characters who are experiencing the lasting effects of large-scale or personal traumatic events, with trauma manifesting in real or imagined monsters. One thing to be aware of with books that kind of have trauma as a theme is that often they involve unreliable narrators. So if you know that your patrons, that's something that they really don't enjoy, just be aware that you may encounter that in books with trauma as a theme. And as an example, we've got Bat Eater and Other Names for Corazon by Kylie Lee Baker. This is a more recent setting. It's set in New York during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Cora is a crime scene cleaner who witnesses the murder of her sister, who was pushed onto subway tracks in front of an oncoming train. Cora is haunted by what she believes to be the hungry ghost of her sister, and at the same time, through her job as a crime scene cleaner, begins to identify a pattern of racially motivated murders that she believes to be the work of a serial killer. And this one really explores trauma through a few different lenses, from the trauma of the loss of a sibling, to the trauma of the COVID-19 pandemic, to the trauma of racism. Devin, if you don't mind advancing. Trends that are more related to subgenre or plot are probably pretty familiar to you because a lot of these are more historical, starting with witchcraft and the occult. So this is a classic subgenre within horror that's being explored in different ways by some big name authors that we've already talked about that y'all have identified in the chat, such as Grady Hendrix, Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and Rachel Harrison. For an example, we have Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. In this book, readers follow a few different main characters across a couple different timelines, actually. The characters being Juan, Rosario, and Gaspar, who are a mother, his deceased wife, and their son. Juan and Gaspar are devastated following the mysterious death of Rosario and travel across Argentina to Rosario's family home. Rosario's family are members of a cult called the Order, which seeks immortality through torture and human sacrifice. And Juan knowingly serves as a medium for the Order, allowing members to commune with their deity. He worries as his son gets a little bit older that the qualities that make him a medium, he's starting to see in his son. So his focus becomes protecting his son from the Order. And as I mentioned, the story does move across timelines, following different characters within each timeline. And through those various different timelines, you learn more about the origins of the Order and the lengths Juan goes to protect Gaspar from the cults. Gothic fiction is having a huge resurgence right now. We talked about this a little bit with Mexican Gothic, but as with Gothic novels past and present, there is that sense of impending dread or doom. These tend to be more atmospheric. They often feature crumbling or decaying once grand houses or estates. They often have supernatural elements built in, and these tend to be less physically terrifying books and more psychologically terrifying. As an example, we have The Only One Left by Riley Sager. In this book, a home health aide named Kit arrives at Hope's End, which is a formerly grand estate that is now decaying and perched above the ocean, to care for an elderly invalid woman named Lenora, who was accused of murdering her family decades earlier and has since been shunned by the town. The characters face psychological and physical peril as the mystery surrounding Lenora begins to unfold. Aspects of Kit's own past are revealed to the reader, and as Hope's End becomes increasingly structurally unstable and starts to crumble around them. Haunted Houses and Cursed Objects, another classic within the horror genre, exploring possessed or cursed places or objects from which characters cannot escape. A recent release by Rachel Harrison is Play Nice, and this follows a social media influencer, Cleo, who returns to her childhood home after her estranged mother's death. Her plan is to flip the home and document the renovation on her social media channels. And this is kind of complicated by the fact that her mother claimed that the house was haunted, and her insistence that the house was possessed by a demon led ultimately to the loss of custody of her children. But as Cleo begins her renovation, she starts to experience phenomena that begin to give credence to her mother's accounts. And then finally, we have body horror, which explores violations of the body. Mostly these are human bodies, but they can also be animals. So caution to readers, there can be, terrible things happening to animals in these books. These books can be pretty violent and gory, unsettling, and visceral. The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim follows a college student who's grappling with her parents' divorce after her father's affair. And as she's dealing with the after effects of that divorce, she becomes obsessed with eyes. And this obsession eventually leads to murder and cannibalism. Devin, if you don't mind advancing. For genre blends, there's going to be some fluidity here. Not all of the novels that I'm about to describe fit neatly into one blend. You can see them kind of bleeding into other blends as well. But horror genre blends can be a really nice entry point for new horror readers. So if you're working with a patron who already kind of knows and loves one particular genre, if you can find that genre blended with a horror novel, that can be kind of a more approachable way for getting those patrons into horror. So I'll highlight a few different genre blends here, but please know that horror genre blends exceed what I have represented on the screen. So for historical fiction blended with horror, this is horror that's set in a previous period in history or within specific historic events. The Deep by Alma Katsu follows a stewardess who survived the sinking of the Titanic and who years later is employed as a nurse on the Titanic's sister ship, the Britannic. This adds a supernatural spin to the sinking of both of these ships. And Alma Katsu is a big name in historical horror. Her books have revisited, in addition to the Titanic and the Britannic, the Donner Party and Japanese internment camps. Horror thriller is a really natural marriage of two genres. Both are designed to evoke emotions that can be very complementary with one another. Reflective of the thriller side of the genre blend, these tend to be a little bit more fast-paced. The Devil Takes You Home by Gabino Iglesias follows Mario, who turns to murder for hire to help pay his daughter's medical bills and as an outlet for the anger he's experiencing after that daughter's death and the decay of his marriage. What is supposed to be one final job plunges Mario into a violent underworld that's filled with supernatural elements that for me really reminded me of a really terrifying spin on magical realism. So you see all of these magical supernatural elements and they are just kind of presented as an expected part of the story. There's not a lot of surprise that they appear. Mario kind of experiences these things as if they are to be expected. Horror Western is a horror that's in an American West setting, and this typically takes place during the 19th and early 20th centuries, and often interrogates westward expansion and manifest destiny. Lone Women by Victor LaValle is set in 1915, and it follows a woman named Adelaide who leaves her family's home in California after an incident that killed her parents. She sets out for Montana with the idea of starting anew and to take advantage of the government's offer of free land for homesteaders. With her, she brings a very large and mysterious trunk that must remain locked at all times to prevent her secret from getting out. Horror romance is horror that includes a romance that looms large in the storyline. And these romantic elements often have a sometimes unconventional happily ever after. Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas is set during the Mexican-American War, and it follows two young lovers, Nena and Nestor, from very different backgrounds. It's kind of a forbidden love type setup. Nena and Nestor reunite 10 years after an attack that Nestor believed left Nena for dead. So when they reunite, Nena's very angry that Nestor left her for dead, and Nestor believes it was his only chance for survival. Together, the two try to escape the US soldiers and the vampire-like creatures that seem to be following the military battles, while also reconciling their fraught past. And then finally, we have another natural genre combo, horror science fiction. This explores the horrific possibilities of the advancement of science, interactions with alien life forms, and technology gone wrong. For an example, I have Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle, and this follows a scriptwriter, Misha, who has finally achieved mainstream success, but faces pressure from studio executives to kill off the gay characters in his series. Refusing at first threatens the survival of his career and ultimately ends up threatening his actual survival and the survival of his loved ones as monsters from his horror movie past come to life and stalk him and his friends. And this one looks at the growing influence of artificial intelligence in everyday life, here really focusing on how it's permeating the motion picture and television industries. Devin, if you'd advance. For popular series, we'll highlight a few that kind of loom large right now. So the Indian Lake trilogy by Stephen Graham Jones includes the novels My Heart is a Chainsaw, Don't Fear the Reaper, and The Angel of Indian Lake. Each book in this trilogy takes place 4 years after the one previous and follows a protagonist named Jade Daniels, who's a half-Native American woman that readers first meet as an angry teenager with an encyclopedic knowledge of horror films. Throughout the trilogy, Jade faces both real and supernatural killers and has to overcome her unfair reputation as a troubled and therefore unreliable individual to convince the disbelieving town of Prufrock of the presence of danger. This trilogy has really helped renew interest in slashers, and it's great for fans of 70s, 80s slasher movies like Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, and Friday the 13th. Sword and Soldier by T. Kingfisher includes What Moves the Dead, What Feasts at Night, and What Stalks the Deep. This series follows Alex Easton, a soldier who investigates mysterious disappearances in very creepy and sometimes familiar landscapes. Here, readers will encounter psychological horror coupled with eco-horror as Alex and their crew use observation and intuition to try to untangle the uncanny. This is a great series for readers of fantasy, again, for readers who are interested in dabbling in horror and folk horror. And this does have a North Carolina tie. The author is North Carolina based. Of the 4 trilogies, the next one, or of the 4 series, excuse me, the next one, the Southern Reach trilogy, might be the most well-known. This is by Jeff Vandermeer. It includes the novels Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance, and he recently published a 4th novel, Absolution, that serves kind of as a prequel and a sequel to the original trilogy. This series explores a mysterious, uninhabited, heavily protected Area X that is surrounded by an impenetrable and expanding border, where unexplained things like disappearances, physical and mental illnesses, and self-harm happen to those who are within Area X. Southern Reach is the government organization that controls access to and sends expeditions into Area X. This is great for readers who enjoy horror or science fiction genre blends, and it does, of course, have the movie tie-in. Annihilation, first book in the series, was made into a movie starring Natalie Portman. And then finally, we have Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Caesar. There are 3 books so far. I don't think that he has any more planned, but I'm not 100% sure about that. This is a young adult series that does have crossover appeal for folks who grew up on the books of R.L. Stine, Christopher Pike, and Richie Slade Cusick. These were all authors that I knew and loved as a child, so this series I enjoyed tremendously. In this series, teen protagonist Quinn Maybrook moves with her father to a small town whose glory days have passed following the closure of the corn syrup factory that kind of propped up the economic side of the town. Quinn and the town's teens become the targets of murderous clown Frendo, who is styled after the mascot of the shuttered corn syrup factory, and it really pits the town's conservative adults against the rebellious teens. Later books in the trilogy follow Quinn as she faces conspiracy theories that the murders never happened, as well as a growing group of Frendo followers. This is a slasher that evokes a sense of nostalgia, as I mentioned, kind of harkening back to those young adult horror writers of the 90s. And it's really perfectly blended with more modern elements. It's also set around Halloween, so it's great for this time of year. And this is another book that does have a movie tie-in. The first book in the series was fairly recently made into a movie that is on the streaming platform Shudder. And Devin, feel free to move on.
All right. Well, I will hop in with using Novelist to find horror titles. Just want to recap the structure of Novelist. It's undergone a UI refresh over the summer, so you'll see this books with buzz section up at the top. They still have the recommended reads list, but those are on the left-hand side. They've added a lot more to the left-hand side, so you can quickly find the genre guides and the story elements index. One thing to note at the top is all the recommendations within Novelist, all the books, series, and authors are categorized by a couple of different things. They're categorized by genre. With horror, you'll notice there are a couple of different genres used to categorize titles: gothics, dark fantasy, paranormal, and I'll kind of jump into how to use those within the database. You'll also see you can always find any theme that's used to categorize a title, and I'll share some popular themes, and then we can go into the themes index and explore all the ones used to categorize horror. And then appeal factors. So I'll show you how to use appeal factors to find titles that are a little bit more on the spooky side for younger readers, but not too scary. And then we can also use things like subject, so the setting of a book, but also the subject of it. So, like an example would be female friendships being a subject of a book. And then we can add in filters on the search results page for time period as well as place. So, if you know your readers really want books set in Scotland, you can add in the location filter as well to find recommendations. Just an example of how you can search by subgenre in Novelist. So you can always put in the GN genre code for horror, but you can also search by the subgenres. So you can search and find Gothic. So there are a lot of Gothic recommendations in the platform. One that stands out that's an award winner is Little Eve, which was published in 2018. It's a dark, atmospheric tale of family secrets and cultish devotion on a remote Scottish island. I think it's good for readers who enjoy titles with a strong sense of place and that sort of ominous mood that a Gothic evokes. Um, in terms of paranormal, as a subgenre, there's Ling Hun by Ai Yan, who is a Chinese Canadian author. This is a novella, so it's a very chilling ghost story. It's set in this mysterious small town named Home, where residents can summon the spirits of their loved ones. It's incredibly moving, and it's a quick read since it's a novella, and so that might be a nice entry point for somebody who's wanting to explore the genre. I'm a huge fan, as I mentioned. Setting is a big thing for me. I love books that are set in Los Angeles, especially 1960s LA. Reluctant Immortals is a historical horror title that's like a feminist reimagining of two classic Gothic figures. So Lucy Westenra from Dracula, so one of the victims of Dracula, and Bertha Mason from Jane Eyre are undead immortals who live in 60s LA, and they have to band together because Dracula and Mr. Rochester are back. So if you're interested and you love the classics, this is a fun reinterpretation of two classics that I really enjoyed. You can also search for horror comics in Novelist. So if you put that genre code in, you can find just horror comics. These are great because graphic novels, I feel like, are a fast-paced, visually engaging read, especially for reluctant readers at the middle grades or YA level. Um, and The Low Low Woods, I love. It's a very surreal feminist horror comic about two girls uncovering their town's terrifying secrets. You can search by theme and novelist. I think this is a great way to branch out beyond genre and encourage people to figure out and understand what they like in their own wheelhouse as a reader. So is it the revenge trope in horror? Is it horror set in a small town? And so small town horror, I think, is a great entry point for readers that know that they already like small town stories and mysteries and thrillers. So um, if they know that they like a writer like S.A. Cosby, who writes a lot of rural noir set in small towns, they might be interested in Jackal by Erin E. Adams. This is a gripping story of a Black woman who returns to her predominantly white hometown and uncovers these cold cases and tries to resolve the mystery of them. Vengeance is Mine. I love a good revenge thriller in horror, revenge trope. And Coffin Moon came out this year. It's on my to be read list, and it is the story of a Vietnam vet set in the Pacific Northwest, where he has to save his niece um, from a vampire. It's very post-apocalyptic and grim and gritty. And the cover just kind of drew me in immediately. I'm a sucker for a good cover. Cursed is a common theme. Burn the Negative is a Hollywood set nightmare about a cursed horror film and the final girl who can't escape her past. Another way that you can search in novelists is by appeal factors. So this is a great way to kind of encourage exploration of horror from fans of other genres and really get people to figure out what elements of a story draw them in. With horror, there's not always the case, or with other genres, but with horror, sometimes you may not find likable characters. You can use the appeal factor search for likable characters. And one example that came up when I searched was The House of Bone and Rain by Gabino Iglesias, which is a gritty but heartfelt story where compassion and horror intertwine in a cursed border town. Scotty gave a fantastic explanation of Alma Katsu. Cinematic, I find, is a great appeal factor for finding stories that have this like mood and sense of place. So The Fervor by Alma Katsu is set in Japanese internment camps around World War II. And then for fast-paced, um, graphic novels are a great fast-paced entry point for horror. E.M. Carroll is a cartoonist, graphic novelist. A Guest in the House is a really interesting reinterpretation of like the Rebecca story. So Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. It's the case of this woman who marries a dentist who moves into his house and is trying to uncover the story of the death of his first wife. And her illustrations are beautiful. She's done a couple of different horror graphic novels, so highly recommend that one. Finding audiobooks and novelists. So you can find audiobook recommendations as well. These are different audiobook appeals. One of them is you can find titles based on the celebrity narrator. So Stephen King, there are a bunch of audiobook versions of Stephen King novels that have come out in the last couple of years with celebrity narrators. I know Sissy Spacek has narrated Carrie. I really like Michael C. Hall's narration of Pet Cemetery, um, multiple narrators. So this is an appeal that I think is great if you want a full voice cast for a book that's really immersive. So episode 13 is a found footage ghost story. And it has an entire cast of narrators, which is really fun. I think found footage lends itself well to audiobooks. So another one that I really recommend is Fantastic Land, which is a post-apocalyptic theme park horror that's told through interviews and recordings and is really just tailor-made for audio. And then Stephen Graham Jones always selects really good narrators for his audiobooks, so I highly recommend them. The Only Good Indians, the narration for this audiobook won an award, and so I wanted to highlight that one as well. Before we get into the platform, I do want to share there are a bunch of curated lists that they have developed for various age ranges. So in the registration, I know that folks mentioned trying to find titles for middle grades YA. These are a great starting point. They might be a little too scary for those who are looking for something spooky. So if you have a YA reader that's looking for something that's more like spooky, seasonal, but not too scary, I wouldn't necessarily give them titles from the straight up scary list for teens and novelists. But these are a good starting point. And then in terms of finding titles for younger readers, so I'll show you all how to use the advanced search to specify by grade level or reading level, but I think that's a great way to combine an appeal term like creepy or haunting, and then use the grade level filter to find something that's age appropriate that might be a little unsettling and seasonal, but not upsetting. Anthologies are great for starting off, including potentially as part of a display, because that way a reader can kind of pick up and read one story, figure out if they like it, read a couple more, but they're not tied to a novel necessarily. One example that jumps out for me is Living Ghosts and Mischievous Monsters, Chilling American Indian Stories. This is a fantastic anthology um, that has some more spooky ones, but then also ones that are particularly chilling. So I would be careful kind of in terms of recommending. One picture book that came out this year that is absolutely beautiful is The Slightly Spooky Tale of Fox and Mole. This is a very gentle autumnal ghost story that's perfect for introducing little ones to light scares. So it's for younger readers, could be part of a story time, but I highly recommend if you're going to pick out these titles before story time, reading through, getting a feel for it, and knowing your audience. But as I mentioned, I really recommend kind of discovering with your younger readers and with parents, sort of figuring out what is their kind of scary. Is it Scooby-Doo, so more spooky side? Or is it Are You Afraid of the Dark? And if you're providing recommendations around the YA section, middle grades, um, or even picture books, making sure that you're providing options is a good way to sort of put some out there, but not necessarily have them all be particularly scary. Here are some spooky gateway titles because this was requested in registration. I highly recommend using certain appeals when you're searching in novelists. Creepy, darkly humorous, or atmospheric are great for finding these titles for younger readers. I also like to check the box for award winners so that I know it's been recognized in some form. And then searching by subgenre. So, a subgenre that helps you find horror titles, especially for younger readers. For some reason, they're just not categorized as horror, but they're categorized as something else, like dark fantasy, paranormal fiction, or ghost stories is another way to find recommendations in the platform. Um, I have 8 here. I'm not going to go through all 8, but I wanted to pick out a couple that I think are great. So, The Girl and the Ghost is a Malaysian folktale inspired story of friendship, curses, and courage. Scary stories for young foxes, for me, brings to mind one of my favorite Seasonal Watches, which is the limited series Over the Garden Wall. It's fantastic if you have not watched that series before. It's spooky, there are scary moments, but it was a miniseries for Cartoon Network. And so it still appeals to viewers of all ages. But Scary Stories for Young Foxes is a series of interconnected animal tales that delivers chills but has emotional depth to it. The House with Chicken Legs is a very whimsical retelling of the Baba Yaga story that's about destiny, death, and finding your own path. Anya's Ghost by Vera Bruscal is a fantastic graphic novel about fitting in. Bruscal is a first-generation immigrant, and so a lot of her stories relate to coming from a family from Eastern Europe, and her illustrations are really fantastic. Bunnicula is a graphic novel that is very much a horror comedy. It's good for fans of, let's say, like Beetlejuice, and is spooky, but really funny and silly. Some more middle grades horror organized from spooky to scary. I wanted to highlight one that I think is particularly great, which is, let me see here, Peril at Price Manor. This is includes a lot of like puzzles. It's a haunted house mystery that includes puzzles in the story and involves a lot of danger, and it's very thrilling and fast paced. I remember as a kid really loving mysteries that had some sort of game element or puzzle element, the Westinghouse being a popular one. And so I think this is a great one that is fun and engaging, potentially for a reluctant reader, but still has that kind of creepy eeriness to it. Paul Tremblay is a pretty prominent horror author. This is his first YA book, is another. I put that on the far end because it's definitely more scary and chilling than Ghost Squad by Claribel Ortega. One thing that I recommend is with these titles, you can always search for them in Novelist and see the starred reviews for them, kind of get a feel for the content of them, to see how scary they are, but then also use read-alikes and kind of see, typically with Novelist, if you're getting one title that's more spooky, you're going to get some recommendations that aren't going to be as scary as well. So that's one thing, one strategy that I'd use in the platform. YA horror. So here are a couple of titles. I included some dark fantasy picks because those are a little bit more on the haunting, spooky side, but aren't necessarily horror. They're not necessarily gory either. So Into the Heartless Wood is a romantic dark fantasy where a monster and mortal fight fate in an enchanted forest. Girls Save the World in this one is a horror comedy set in um, the girls in the story face a real zombie apocalypse at a fan convention. Sorry, y'all. Um, this is a great pick for. I feel like horror comedies are good for introducing younger readers. They're not intimidating. They're not too graphic. And this one having some laughs kind of lightens the tension. The Black Girl survives in this one. I really want to recommend this. This is a fantastic anthology that came out. It was edited by Desiree S. Evans and Ceresia J. Fennell. It's a really an empowering anthology where Black girls take center stage in horror stories that defy the genre's tropes. And if you have YA readers that are looking for something that um, is a little bit more graphic, intense, We Shall Be Monsters by Tara Sim is a Frankenstein-inspired tale of love, ambition, and what it means to defy death. That is a title that I included far at the end because it's a little bit more graphic. It might be a good recommendation, especially as the new Frankenstein adaptation comes to theaters this fall and is a nice interpretation or inspired by Frankenstein. Genre guide. So these are quick overviews of the genre broken down by age range in Novelist with some practice searches, authors to watch, and tips for marketing. We're going to get into the platform now so you can see what those look like. All right. So, curated lists, you'll see on the left-hand side here. And then it's going to give you this full list. What I do is go over to the right-hand side and I add in the filter for horror. And I have 13 recommended reads lists in the platform. What I love in Novelist is these for fans of lists. They update them regularly, but they're tied into pop culture phenomena. So if you have patrons that love horror movies, the for fans of weapons list might be a good pick for exploring horror related to missing people, small towns, and evil lurking in the distance. If you want to go back, you can narrow this list by age range and say, I just want to look at teen recommendations, and you have 4 here. So for fans of Clown in a Cornfield, must read for fans of Fear Street, and then straight up scary. I'm going to click the novelist icon, return back from the homepage, and clear my search. I am going to show you all using the advanced search. So I like to add in an appeal, maybe even a theme as well, or a genre, and then check the box for certain things. I could check the box for award winner. I can add in grade level. So let's say I want to find a title that's an award winner that's creepy, but it's at a 4th grade reading level. I can check all those filters and then see here, what am I going to find? I have 4 different titles that I could explore, like Deep, Dark, and Dangerous, and I can always uncheck things as well. And now I have 131 results. Let's say I want to limit to what's been published in the last 5 years, and then I can explore further and I can check unwanted guests and see some of the other appeal factors here. One of the nice things that they've added into the platform is the clickable appeal factors on the book page. So let's say I wanted to find more haunted houses that are paranormal comics and about siblings. Now I have 2 recommendations that come up: Unwanted Guests and All the Lovely Bad Ones, a ghost story graphic novel. And that gives you, yeah, Mary Downing Hahn, a very focused search that cuts through all the thousands and thousands of recommendations there are in the platform. And you can even go further and see paranormal comics with colorful illustrations. And this gives me 58 different results. I can narrow by age range. I can check the box for award winner if I wanted and narrow this list down further and further if I'd like. I'm going to jump into quick links, and I want to show you all these genre guides that have been tucked away in the left-hand side navigation. So it's going to give you that full list, but you can always go to genre. And let's see here. Horror. I have 3 different guides: horror for teens, horror for older kids, and horror for adults. So let's jump into horror for older kids and see here this explanation of horror, especially for this age range, some top themes that are linked, so you can search them in the platform immediately. Why do readers like horror? Some key titles or series like the Small Spaces Quartet, Scary Stories for Young Foxes, key authors to know, foundations of horror, authors to watch, and then how do I help and market to horror fans? These are tucked away at the bottom of the guide, but I think are fantastic. Um, and they really provide recommendations all year round. So you can highlight not only the seasonal, October spooky season titles, but also share. They mention the Horror Writers Association puts together a summer scares program each summer with a reading list and programming ideas, um, and then some helpful searches to try. So if I wanted to see the search kids discover and try to break curses, it gives me this specialized search with some titles. I'm logged in right now as Noose Regional Library, and they have their catalog linked with novelists. And so if your library's catalog is linked with novelists, you can click the check catalog button, and then it shows if it's available at your library. If your library does not have their catalog linked but wants to, always know that you can email the NC Live Help Desk, and we can help you get that set up with Novelist. One thing that I want to share that I really feel like is kind of the next step in getting a feel for horror and how it's categorized in Novelist is by going to Discover Novelist and then the Appeals Factor Index, the Themes Index, and the Genre Index. So I'm going to start with the Genre Index, and you can see all the subgenres for horror that are listed. You can also see all the genres that are used to categorize titles in Novelist. But it's going to be under speculative. And you can see it's not a long list of subgenres within horror specifically, but there is overlap with others. There's genre blends, as Scotty shared, with a couple of different examples. Apocalyptic comics or apocalyptic fiction could kind of get into horror territory. You'll also see here paranormal comics, horror comics being listed under graphic novels. And then let me click on an example like under fantasy. Dark fantasy is one that I feel like kind of borders on the line with horror. And then you can add in filters here. So let's say I want to find dark fantasy for teen audience. That's an award winner. And then I can add in different appeal factors that might fit, like gruesome or creepy, or haunting. Let's see what comes up here. So I've added all these filters, and now I have 80 results. I can also limit this to the last 5 years, and now I have 7. And these are all dark fantasy that might be a good fit for YA. But that's where those genre blends kind of come into play. And some things are just never categorized as horror, but they're categorized as a blend of another genre, like paranormal mystery or dark fantasy. Going into the themes index, I know in the chat it was mentioned that the curated lists are a great way to develop a display. Definitely agree. Another tool that you can use are these themes. So they have broader themes here, but also genre-specific ones. me pull up horror, fantasy, horror. And so here are some common themes as I highlighted earlier. Final girls being a common theme of the genre. So think like Cindy in Scream. You have this final girl that's able to survive and um, is kind of this example of triumph, but also in some ways can be an example of trauma and what trauma lives on after something terrible happens. But the final girls trope is a common one in horror, and you can find that clickable theme and recommendations that way. I'm going to go through and share another example. Let's see, within horror. So a couple others here: haunted houses and creepy places, possessed, zombie apocalypse, body horror, found footage. I'm going to click on cosmic horror, which is very much in the style of H.P. Lovecraft, and is one that's kind of hard sometimes to define. But let's say I want to look at Direct Descendant, which came out earlier this year and is a cozy standalone horror novel set in modern day Toronto that is categorized as cosmic horror. One thing I recommend for novelists is you can use these for collection development purposes. You can also check the box for award winner, and often keep an eye out for titles that are winning awards in the last few years, because they tend to kind of have a delay where they become popular with readers a few years later. Grady Hendrix is one that I feel like has just surged in popularity in the last few years, but he's been publishing obviously for a while. And so keeping an eye on those award winners is a great way to get an idea of what's going to be popular with your patrons. Let's see. One other thing in Novelist is that Appeal Factors Index. This is where you can find appeal factors. So these are beyond genre specifically, and allow you to find based on illustration, characters' identities, audiobook appeals, as I mentioned. Jumped a little too far. There we go. Sinister. So these sinister appeals are not just for horror, but they are good for finding horror titles. So let's say if I want to find, I'm going to go with menacing. And I want to find a title for teen. I can add in here. I can also add in genre if I wanted to check the box for horror. And then I can also add in other things like location. Let's say I want to find, sometimes it takes, there we go. Let's say I want to find one set in New England. And then I have 7 different titles here with the source type. Sometimes it adds in audiobook, so now I have 4. And here are a couple of recommendations that come up. One thing to avoid recommending something that might be a little bit more intense for, especially for younger readers, is skimming and reading through the reviews that are available within Novelist, getting a feel for, mood as a driving element in this gothic suspense tale. Several satisfying twists, fast-paced, climax leads to an action-packed showdown, and an entertaining dark thriller. So this kind of gives you an idea it's intense, it's twisty, but it might not necessarily be particularly gory because it's more on the Gothic fiction side of things. Jumping back to the homepage, we are going to head into our slides and just go through a couple of tips for marketing to horror fans. So in terms of helping readers, I have a couple of best practices. So asking about comfort level first. Do they like something that's a little bit more eerie and atmospheric with psychological tension? Or do they want something that's more of a slasher with full-on gore? Horror is very personal, and horror readers develop a strong attachment to the genre. But really, it's important to understand what kind of scares a reader might enjoy. It helps you recommend something that kind of crosses their boundaries. I know for fans of the genre, some people might love Gothic fiction, but they really draw the line at body horror. Offer entry points or theme suggestions. I keep mentioning kind of these bridges or gateway titles, and Scotty has as well. Not everybody's ready for extreme horror. And so looking at things that are entry points and thinking about this phrase entry points helps you find spooky mysteries or supernatural thrillers that can ease new readers into the genre. Even theme suggestions like about haunted houses or small town secrets can make horror feel more approachable and customizable for a patron. Be transparent about content. I really recommend that you be upfront with like about the tone and intensity of what you're recommending. Mentioning sort of triggering elements or violence levels or disturbing themes really builds trust with readers. One resource that I'll include in the handout that we prepared for this webinar is called Does the Dog Die? It's a platform that provides titles, recommendations for movies, books, but also shares kind of like trigger warnings for those titles. And so you can find a lot of popular books in there. So if you want to see with like horror story, you can search horror story by Grady Hendrix and see what are some things that I might want to kind of uh, be keeping an eye out for if I'm going to recommend this to a patron. Um, don't be afraid of different formats. So horror translates so beautifully across formats from novels to comics to short stories, audiobooks, and even podcasts like Welcome to Night Vale. Some readers prefer the quick tension of a graphic novel or the immersive atmosphere of a well-narrated audiobook. Giving people those options is a nice way for them to figure out their own tastes. Leverage non-book media. So I included Sinners as an example that was very popular, a great genre experiment this year. Ask readers what horror movies, shows, or games they might enjoy. It's a great way to gauge their taste, comfort level, and make book connections. With Sinners, I included a couple of book recommendations below. Out There Screaming is a horror anthology of short story black horror. They're short stories that were edited by Jordan Peele. That's a fantastic anthology that you can include in a display for fans of Sinners. Vampires of El Norte as an example of horror blended with romance, and then The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones as a more historic horror title that can be a good entry point for fans of Sinners. And then have exit ramps ready. So sometimes a reader discovers that a book is too much and they need to drop it off and not finish it, and that is always good. Have exit ramp options on hand. So titles that keep maybe the suspense, but dial back some of the intensity, like dark fantasy or paranormal mysteries. This keeps the reading experience enjoyable without abandoning the genre altogether.
So some of the questions that you can ask readers to get to those best practices that Devin mentioned include, do you like horror that's more atmospheric or creepy? Or do you prefer those really intense scares, violence, gore, things of that nature? Do you prefer horror that feels more realistic or more supernatural? Are there any topics you prefer avoid in horror stories? What are your deal breakers? So as Devin already mentioned, things like body horror, things that include violence to animals, those can be big deal breakers for folks. So knowing that in advance allows you to point readers to books that aren't going to have those triggering elements. Are there any horror movies or shows you enjoyed outside of horror? What other genres do you enjoy reading? Again, thinking about those genre blends. So if you have one genre that you know your readers love, finding a horror novel that marries with that genre can be a really nice entry point. Do you enjoy horror with a classic feel, like Gothic novels, or more modern writing? And finally, what kind of pace do you like? So if you like something really fast paced, a horror thriller blend can be beautiful.
Wanted to share a couple of horror awards. There's also some awards that are for just like the broader banner of speculative fiction that cover horror, sci-fi, fantasy, like the Nebula Awards. We'll include those in the handout that we've made for the webinar. But I definitely recommend checking out the Bram Stoker Awards, and the Shirley Jackson Awards. Locus and Ignite and Aurealis are more for speculative fiction, but those are great tools for finding recognized horror in the last couple of years. And I always use those as a guide and kind of work my way back and see, all right, what's been an award winner for the last 5 or 6 years, and pulling out some recommendations and hidden gems that way. Some relevant resources. So Becky Spratford, I feel like, is the de facto horror readers advisory expert in libraries. She runs the RA for All blog. She just put out the Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror, the 3rd edition. And she has another book that she published this year that is a collection of nonfiction from different horror authors about why they love the genre. I'll put the title of that book is escaping me, but that came out, I think, in the last month or so, and I'll include that in the handout. But this is a great guide if you're really looking to dig deep with doing horror readers advisory. Highly recommend podcasts as a good tool for staying up to date with trends in readers advisory. I'm a huge fan of Book Lounge by Libby and the Reading Glasses podcast, but here are a couple of horror theme ones like Books in the Freezer and Talking Scared that are good if you want to dig deep into the genre. I wanted to highlight some horror ebooks that we have in the NC Live Homegrown collection. We have a lot of lesser known authors. Here are 2 authors that come to mind, and are foundational to horror. So Clive Barker, the Books of Blood stories are in our Homegrown collection. And then The Adventures of Mr. Maximilian Bacchus, and his Traveling Circus is also available in the Homegrown collection. I love Clive Barker. You may know him also as the director of the Hellraiser movie. He is much more on kind of body horror side. It's much more gruesome, but it's also very philosophical writing that he's doing. But they're scary. So I would say with this, if you know somebody who really likes scary titles, you can recommend Books of Blood. Would not call it an entry point by any means. But I personally wanted to highlight these because you may not know that they are in our Homegrown collection. One of the benefits of this collection is there are no holds or wait lists. An entire community can read the same book at the same time. They're also all available in Libby. Thomas Ligotti is very much on the side of weird fiction, cosmic horror, and the book Death Poems is available in the Homegrown collection as well. We also have a lot of indie horror authors in our collection from, I believe, Workman's Press is the publisher. Just highlighting, if you want to make a direct link to the Homegrown book collection in your library's instance of Libby, know that you can email the help desk. One thing that's nice about having the direct link to Homegrown is it advertises for your patrons these are books that you can immediately check out. There's no waiting or wait list, and you can instantly enjoy them, which is a challenge with Libby sometimes when you're waiting months for a title that you want to read or listen to. Some marketing tips and resources. I know we're wrapping up, and I do want to make sure we have time for questions. Just some outreach ideas. I highly recommend connecting with the Horror Writers Association. They have a North Carolina chapter. Invite regional authors to events or kind of organize events around genres. Writers are always excited to be a part of library programming. And so it really does require just putting out that ask. I'd also recommend, if you have a good partnership with your local bookstore, partnering on certain events. One thing that we've seen across the state is like horror writers panels. Orange County Library organized one last year with several horror writers. They also did a horror trivia night at their southern branch last week. Charlotte Mecklenburg Library organized a Black Horror in Cinema watch with Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror, the documentary, and then a film screening of Get Out with a guided conversation. Really great way to engage with the philosophical underpinnings of horror. Even the sociological view of like what makes us afraid. That's a really interesting tie-in for discussion. And then Durham County Library had an evening of horror and heavy metal earlier this month with local authors and a special performance from the Charlotte doom metal band Cosmic Reaper. So a fun way to engage with patrons and highlight local artists and authors. One thing, as I mentioned, you can do is link your library's catalog with novelists. That's a great way to empower your genre fiction readers who might read very extensively. They've read everything by Stephen Graham Jones or Sylvia Moreno Garcia. They're looking for something else. They can use novelists to then explore their tastes, but it really does help to have the ability for them to check what's available in your library's catalog in the platform. So if you're interested, know that you can reach out and we can help you get that set up. Targeting readers with print, we have tons of promotional materials on our website, but you can also order promotional materials for novelists through our website in a shopping cart-like experience. You can get glossy posters and bookmarks, and Novelist takes care of printing them out and then ships them to your library, and we just act as a middleman. But that allows you to have a lot of fantastic high-quality print materials at no cost that you can include in holds, book displays, and book bundles. All right, and now I know we're close to time, but any questions as we wrap up? Know that you can always reach out to us if you have any questions, if you want to ask Scotty about collection development for horror, and all the great things that she's doing for leisure reading at Western Carolina University. You can reach out to Scotty if you have any questions for me about any titles or databases or using Novelist. Always know that I'm just an email away or a call. We have the link to the slides. We've also made a handout for this webinar that we'll include in our follow-up email that we'll send out tomorrow. I am going to jump into that so you can see. We've included a lot of Reader's Advisory support. We've listed out all the titles used and mentioned in this webinar, and then some support materials for novelists that I'll add in as well. And we will add in all your fantastic recommendations too. One final thing, we have one more Reader's Advisory webinar coming up this year, Enchanting Escapes, Romantasy Reader's Advisory. I will be co-hosting that with Rachel Corey, who's a branch manager at Harnett County Public Library and hosts their wildly popular Romantasy Book Club. And that's happening on November 18th. And I will have more Reader's Advisory webinars in 2026 as well. But thank you all so much. We are at time. feel free to send us any questions in the chat. We'll stick around for another minute or so. But thank you all so much for being here this afternoon. Oh, Scotty, I think your sound cut out, but
We're just thanking everyone for being here and thanking you for inviting me to co-host.
yes, I'm so glad you were able to co-host this with me. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a good rest of your October and enjoy some spooky reads.